Hello, happy Friday. My name's Hermione McKee. I am the Group CFO at SumUp. And today, on the day of all Fridays, there's something very special about Fridays. Fridays is statistically the day women work for free. So what could we better be doing on this Friday ahead of International Women's Day tomorrow than actually talking about financial literacy and thinking about ways we can actually address this and come together as women to try and improve some of those inequalities that exist, particularly in the world of finance. Financial literacy really matters. And so today we're going to talk about why it matters and where we can find it. Now, it's not just a word that was determined and sounds fancy. Actually, financial literacy is about money. And money affects every single aspect of our lives. And our relationship with it is really complex and really personal. For some people, money is about putting a roof over our heads or feeding our families. For other people, money might be a status symbol. And for others, money is actually a source of power. And we see that increasingly in the world today. And so how do we come together and understand money? Because it's our understanding of money that remains one of the biggest gaps that's holding us back globally. Statistically, women lag behind here in the understanding of money and therefore financial literacy. And there are a number of different areas we can talk about with this. One of those might be negotiations. Now, for us in this room, sitting and working for a big company, that might be about salary negotiations. How do we walk into that room with confidence? For others who might be starting their own business, it might be about price negotiations. It might be about negotiations with customers or suppliers, or for that matter, with investors. We know the statistics about women in negotiations, and it's on all of us to step up our knowledge, to walk into that room with confidence and to advocate for equal treatment. Now, this flows through to a focus on wise investments. It's interesting to think that women live on average 5 years longer than men. And yet, on average, they retire with 30% less savings. That is a meaningful difference and has a meaningful impact on the way women can operate through their earning lives, their investing lives, and through their risk tolerance. And we're going to talk about that. But growing wealth is not as complex as it might seem. And we can quickly demystify some of the core components there. Another part that differentiates us is this need to avoid debt traps. Now, there are a number of financial tools out there, many of which people are afraid of, many of which people are reticent to use, but we can use various different financial tools wisely. And we must always, within that context, retain a focus on cash flow, because at the end of the day, the cash flow is the real money. And all of us leads this through to financial independence. Now, if we imagine a world where everyone has the knowledge and confidence to make smart financial decisions, in that context, financial literacy isn't about budgeting, which people don't like, it turns out. It's actually about empowerment. It's about how we can create our own choices and sustain that over time. When women have financial knowledge, they actually make better decisions for themselves, for their families, for their communities, and that has a real impact on the well-being of those communities and beyond. So it's very important that we do not rely on others in the long run and in the short term for our own financial well-being. Now, it's all well and good, but the current economic environment is full of uncertainty. This is not news to anybody. Not only is the world uncertain, but at a macro level, an economic environment is very uncertain. We don't know what prices will be tomorrow. We don't know what rates will be tomorrow. We don't know what our world is going to look like in 6 months' time, let alone 2 years' time. But that doesn't mean that we should all sit and hide in a room until that uncertainty is over. Because actually, in certain times, uncertainty can create opportunity. And in times of uncertainty, it's even more important to be well educated and to be making the right decisions about what we're doing with our money. And this applies both to us on a personal level, as well as to small businesses, as well as to big businesses that operate globally. Understanding the uncertainty and being able to apply basic tools to try and reduce that uncertainty for ourselves is a critical component of financial literacy. Now, one interesting thought around this is that 2 years ago, in a world that was theoretically more stable, you had to pay to keep money in the bank. Actually, I'm going to say 3 years ago now. You had to pay to keep money in the bank because interest rates were negative. We were actually receiving negative interest on our savings. Now, you can find current accounts where you can access your money daily, actually generate 2 to 3% on the money that you store there. And that's a function of uncertainty. And so this is a really different way to think about the risks associated with uncertainty and what you're doing with that money in times of uncertainty. Now, this being said, there is this focus on balancing risk and reward, and it is a very delicate thing. And it's also a very personal thing because everybody's risk tolerance is very, very different. Every individual has a risk tolerance that depends on their personality. Now, how well do you sleep at night in terms of stress? There are some people who simply do not sleep. There are others who go to bed, sleep like a baby for 12 hours, wake up the next morning and put themselves at more risk. Personality has a very, very large impact on our own risk tolerance and therefore what we feel comfortable doing with our money and our resources generally. Our family has a big impact on that. What is the family environment you grew up in? How did your parents behave with money? What family do you have now? I know for me, 10 years ago, I had a much higher risk tolerance than now when I have 3 small children depending on me. That has a very large impact on your ability to tolerate risk, both personally and financially. Obviously, it depends on your current finances. Somebody who's got a very large wealth base to fall back on can naturally take more risks. It depends on your age. If you are nearing retirement, you have to be more careful about ensuring you retain and keep a nest egg for retirement than somebody who's in their 20s who actually can maybe afford to lose it all and start again. These things have a very big impact. And then finally, obviously, your knowledge and what you know about finances and the things that you can do with that money. But that's something that we can change and that we can address. And this is something that we're going to talk about today, but there is no one correct path here. And then the final thing is the environment around us also obviously influences our willingness to take risk. And that might be our peers, that might be the political environment, that might be the geopolitical environment. All of these things have a big impact, and the only thing that can mitigate that is increasing your own knowledge. And this is where it's on all of us to actively seek that out. Now, the first topic is when we talk about investing wisely. I'm going to talk super generically here because I'm not going to give out investment advice. That's not my place and not my area of specialty. But I think that it is important for us to understand and acknowledge some generic truths. And the first of those is about learning. We start off with being clear on our objectives. What are the objectives for this investment? This might be you investing in your own business. I want to start a business to create my own independence, to create a business that I can hand to my children or that can pay my rent on a day-to-day basis with the freedom to do what I need. It might be about, I want to be able to buy a house in 2 years' time and I'm going to start saving for that. There are a number of different objectives that might drive your investment approach, and you need to be very clear on what that is and understand why you're taking those decisions. This means you need to think about the future commitments that you have. You have objectives, but before you can reach that objective, you also need to pay rent and you need to buy food. You may need to pay people's salaries, and all of these things play into this. How do you think about the components of those? As part of that learning experience, I think that one of the most important things is to talk to people about it. And particularly as women, it's not often that we sit in a room together with a glass of wine and talk about money. That's a massive gap, because the more we talk about this, the more we learn, and the more we learn from each other. The other component here is to identify experts, which is a natural thing, but in the world today, it's quite hard to identify experts. And so really be thoughtful about, what advice am I taking? What advice am I going to ignore? And how am I going to employ this in a way that's relevant and useful for me? And that process of learning is an ongoing process, as the world and environment around us is always, always changing. And that means our investment approach, our risk tolerance, our objectives are also always changing. And therefore, that learning process never stops. And that's about talking to people, reading, research. Really thinking about this as something that is an essential life skill you need to continue to develop over time. The other component is about cash. And for people who have been working at SumUp, they will have heard me talk about, we have our P&L and we have our cash flow. And these can be two very different things. When you work in a large organization, sometimes it is, you focus very hard on your P&L and I've got my revenue all the way through to my net profit. That can be very different to a cash flow. What matters is cash. Always what matters is cash, because that's what you pay people with. That's how you pay your rent. And that's what your customers are paying you with. And for us as individuals, that's also what matters. So understanding monthly cash needs is probably the most important thing you can do as a business owner, the most important thing you can do as an individual, and the most important thing you can do as an operator within a business. Because without this is where you start to, the rubber hits the road. So once you've understood your monthly cash needs, then what you do is identify your excess cash. What is the stuff that I don't need this month? What is what I don't need in the next 6 months? And this might be 20 euros, it might be 100 euros, it might be 100,000 euros. All of these things, this is my excess cash. And out there, as I spoke about earlier, there are a number of different opportunities to put that excess cash to work for you so that you're working, but your cash is also working. And it might be finding a bank account where I can put this 100 euros aside for 6 months and earn 5% on that. I can put this 20 euros in a bank account that pays me 2%. All of these things are relatively risk-free, particularly in a developed market context where there's deposit guarantees. But even on a more global basis, and as you continue to increase your risk tolerance over time, you can actually start to see how that money can really work for you. And particularly in environments of uncertainty, understanding that and making that money work for you is increasingly important. As you do this, you need to ensure, coming back to this monthly cash needs, you're actually monitoring that cash liquidity, because sometimes that changes. At the beginning of the month, you might say, I need 500 euros this month. Anything can happen. And so actually monitoring that and really keeping an eye on what that looks like, for me as a financial steward of this company, is important. For you as individuals and for people, all with small businesses across the globe, that is critical to consistently monitor that and ensure that you have that buffer. And then obviously diversifying where your cash is stored and invested is also important, depending on, how much is out there and what that looks like. But I think what's really important here is that you need to keep your eyes on the long game, so that this is not worth doing because this is going to get me 5 euros. This is not worth doing. It's always worth doing. Even if just for the education component, it is always worth doing and always worth going through these various steps. And starting today is the best time to start. Sorry, that sounds cheesy, but it is what it is. I think the other component of this is when you actively manage a business, it's not just about I'm managing my marketing activity and I'm managing my inventory. I need to make sure I've got enough to sell. I need to make sure that the staff are on the desk at the right time. we can actually more actively manage business finances, and that can really accelerate growth. And in a world where growth means huge amounts to us, that's, again, accelerates a path towards financial independence. Now, historically and for many cultures, using debt has been a big, scary topic and a big no-no. Now, that makes sense if you don't have a cash flow or an understanding of what's coming up ahead. So there are a number of financial tools out there that people avoid. But if you can incur debt and use things like debt, wisely, ensuring that if you do incur it, it's offset by gains in asset value, over which you need a long time horizon to be sure of. You can't in any way, shape or form ensure that an asset will be higher in 6 months than it is today. But in general, over a longer period of time, that should be, that should be something that you can get comfortable with. Or it's offset by a guaranteed revenue stream. Now, the guaranteed revenue stream one in particular is a really interesting component, particularly for small business owners, where examples might be a working capital loan, whereby I know that, over the next 3 weeks, I'm going to sell at least 100 coffees. Therefore, I'm going to borrow that money to buy my coffee beans today, and this is going to help me to accelerate that and move it forward. So I'm not actually restricted by today's cash flows. This is something that, as a small business owner, can be really interesting to look at, depending obviously on the nature of the revenue. So there are a number of these different tools out there to look at and explore as you look at different ways to grow the business. Another one might be, for example, with an online gaming business, to be able to accelerate the revenues that are coming from app stores by borrowing that money against the future app store money that's going to come in. All of those different components can actually help to accelerate the acquisition of players within a gaming environment. There's so many different options here that you can think about and play with. But that being said, you do need to avoid the debt traps, where using debt to fund day-to-day operations is really the equivalent of using credit cards to fund your lifestyle. And so we do need to think about specific financial tools carefully in the context of our own income streams and revenue generation. So this really comes down to seeking information everywhere we can. When I think about where can I get the highest interest rates on my cash, but importantly, still take it out when I need it, there are so many different comparison sites and specific providers. There are providers that can compare, that can actually dynamically adjust your deposits across various different deposit accounts. There are obviously providers that will compare different banks even within a very small area in Berlin. You can look at a small area of Berlin and say, within these 20 banks here, which one's offering the best interest rate for daily liquidity or for a 6-month deposit. These things are very, very easy to find now, and those comparison sites make that super available. Then when we talk about how can I get faster access to cash I know is coming from my customers, again, really investigating the potential for working capital financing, or for a longer term debt if you really believe that over time, this is how I can manage and leverage my business. And then how do I plan for a future that seems very uncertain? This is about, again, focusing on cash. How do I continue to build a cash flow buffer? But I think there's 2 real things here that also stand out. There is this, in particular for women, talking about this and having these conversations on a regular basis is one of the most important ways to find information, because there are so many of us that are either wondering what to do, thinking, I don't really know what to do, not having the confidence to actually step up and deploy that. Having those conversations helps us to build that confidence and to be able to do it collectively over time. And this is something that is very different in a male environment where there is that complete comfort, and I can't tell you how many rooms I've sat in with men discussing their money and what they're doing with it, versus the rooms I've sat in with women where that is just not a topic of conversation. So the more we talk about it collectively, the more we can actually unlock a lot of that knowledge that sits there, as well as build confidence to be able to really take action and deploy capital in the right way. And so I wanted to sort of end with that final word on financial independence. And financial independence, particularly at SumUp, has become a bit of a buzzword. And so now to the point where it does feel cheesy. But it is one of the most important things, particularly for women, to unlock growth within economies, within communities, and that growth drives increasing well-being for people all around us. And so when we talk about money, that we need to be aware that that relationship with money is very unique. It's very different for every individual, and the way we think about it, the way we relate to it, our comfort with it, all of those components are completely different depending on who you talk to. But that being said, there are specific ways of dealing with it and the knowledge associated with it that is not unique, that actually can be applied whether it's 5 euros or 5 million euros. These things are the same. It's just a different scale and a number of zeros at the end. And the knowledge and understanding of how to deal with that money is very consistent. And this means that wealth over time means different things to different people. What does wealth mean to individuals across the globe? And within those times of uncertainty, wealth for a large number of people creates safety. And that has a big impact on the way people interact and operate. And you can see this playing out on a regular basis, this impact of wealth. And so how do we as women build wealth, no matter what it means to us? Because at the end of the day, it creates choices, it creates optionality, and it creates, to a large number of people, safety from which they can operate confidently. And so regardless of that level of wealth or what that level of wealth is, taking control and that independence around your finances really creates independence on a long run basis. So this relying on other people for your own financial independence needs to be broken. Whether you're a student or a professional, an entrepreneur, stay-at-home mum, financial literacy and understanding that is really important. And that's not just about fairness, but it's about economic growth and independence. When women thrive financially, whole societies prosper. And the only way we can continue to build that is by talking to each other, by increasing our own knowledge and lifting each other up. Because that financially empowered women, both individually and collectively, can be pretty unstoppable as we go forward.
And there's a number of questions that came in that we would love to ask you, right? So the first one, what advice would you give to women looking to secure funding for their business, whether through investors, loans, or grants?
Yeah, there's a number of different things here. I think specifically, so if I start with grants, because that's one of the easier components, I think really understand the purpose of that grant, what the nature of it is, and do your research. Mm-hmm. This is the most important thing. That being said, if you don't qualify, or if you don't qualify for one specific point within the grant, apply anyway. Doesn't matter. In order to get the money, you have to apply for it. And I think we can sometimes be overly critical or a little bit too sort of strict on our assessments. make sure that you match most of it, really do your research, understand what they're looking for, and apply anyway. The second is a little bit the same with investors and loans. You need to do your research. On the investor side, two specific things. One, ensure that the investors you're talking to are the ones that are investing in your type of business. Investors are very specialized, and you need to be clear that you're talking to the right people, not just because they invest in your type of business as a matter of habit, but also that you can partner with them for the long term. When investors buy part of who you are, you need to have a relationship with them that lasts, and you need to work together for a long time. So really be clear on what that looks like. And again, part of that is about putting your best foot forward and doing your research on the investors, what they're looking for, and making sure that that's what you're putting out there and asking for. On the loan side, there is this additional layer, as I spoke about, of ensuring that you can cover your obligations. Because if somebody's lending you money, they're not looking for you to take over the world. They're looking to make sure that your business doesn't go to zero in 6 months' time. And so in this particular situation, you need to focus on, this is how I'm sustaining and covering my obligations over the time of the loan. And you need to be able to show that very, very clearly. Yeah. So this research component of these three very different things and addressing the ask is the most important part. And then obviously actually speaking up.
Great. Can you suggest safe learning materials, courses, resources to learn about investing and how to avoid investment traps?
Investment, yeah. Can I? Yes. I think there are a number of sort of basic rules and tools out there that apply. But there's also just a lot of information available about this, from your basic, this is how to be a value investor, from, that was written 100 years ago, to this is how to invest in a range of ETFs and funds that it's easier for you to diversify in. All of that being said, today it is required by basic investment platforms that they provide you that education. So I think starting there is a really good place to start. And as you start to sort of uncover and dig out a whole world of information that's available, but really starting with, why I should, by the way, an ETF stands for an exchange traded fund. And what that means is it's just a very easy product that you can buy via any trading platform that might give you exposure to a theme, a country, an index, and it's something that you don't need to trade around in. So I think using your trading platform, as a starting point, and then starting to explore and ask questions of that over time. But the most important, start with the basics. Mm-hmm. Because if we start to get too clever, then that's when it starts to go very badly wrong, because there are people who, spend 24 hours a day and hundreds of millions being cleverer than the rest of us. So actually just starting with the basics and then keeping a long-term time horizon, this is the most important thing that we as simple individuals can do.
Fantastic, thank you. What steps can women take to build financial confidence and make informed investment or savings decisions? Can you recommend also some favorite learning resources on personal finance? Books, courses, any experts to follow?
No.
Tough question.
So I think one of, as I said, one of the most important things is that actually women talk about it with each other more often. And to me, that is the biggest thing that helps us to build confidence. Because, we could sit in a dark room reading the internet for the next, 100 weeks. I really believe that the most important thing is to actually talk about it with each other and discuss. And to open up those flows of communication helps to build that confidence and to find more information over time. So that's the most important thing. On the resources and tooling, it's really hard to identify which individuals to follow because A, it changes over time, And to be fair, people that put their information out on the internet are not necessarily the ones who are A, making the most money, B, the smartest, or C, the ones who are going to continue making money. And this is very well evidenced in things like the meme stocks or very famous sort of, I don't like to name names, but if you think about somebody like Jim Cramer, who speaks very loudly, very noisily, and makes a lot of, commotion, I mean, great. And he does have some really interesting thoughts, but at the end of the day, there is absolutely no replacement for, I am familiar with this theme, I am comfortable investing in this broad topic. There is no replacement for that from listening to anybody. And each individual, their performance changes so quickly and rapidly. Somebody might have a hot streak for 6 months and everybody follows them. 6 months later, they've lost everything. It's really hard, when people make a lot of noise, to establish some sustainability or consistency.
Yeah, but for me, it's the opposite. Like, I'm very well aware that my husband knows everything about the finances of his friends. So he knows what stock they are investing. They really discuss it regularly, and then he talks about it with me. But my girlfriends, like women friends, I have absolutely no clue, and I would I would shy out of talking about it. I don't like talking about finances with them, but it's super important.
Yeah. It feels somehow too private, right?
Yeah.
But exactly. Men talk about it.
I mean, we talk about lots more private things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, it's really a taboo.
Are there any common misconceptions about financial management that often hold women back?
I think a lot of women think that it's complicated. Mm-hmm. And it's not, because it's about cash. That's it. It's not complicated. It feels complicated, but it's...
And we should start today.
Start. Yes. And if your money might be in the bank, but that doesn't mean it can't do anything for you. So I think that's the biggest part.
The biggest misconception. What financial mistakes do you see entrepreneurs making most often, and how can they avoid them?
So I think there is, for a long time, money wasn't free, but there was a lot of money floating around for entrepreneurs that was invested in businesses that looked amazing, but didn't have the basic economics right. And they showed huge growth. So revenue is not a measure of economic potential. But for a long time, that was the only measure that was looked at. The next one was profitability. And profitability, accounting profitability, again, it's a great measure. When you look at it in conjunction with revenue growth, it's extremely interesting. But it is not equivalent to cash. And at the end of the day, cash is the only thing that matters. And so when we talk about cash flow generation is what truly creates financial independence. And if you don't have financial independence, you're reliant on the next investor coming in or another fundraising round. You are severely restricted in the way you can run your business. That is the biggest mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs have made, particularly over the last 5 years. And that has not played out super well. That's why we've had such a strong focus on financial independence, because now we do have the opportunity to run our business in a way that we believe is best for the long run, rather than relying on an investor that needs their money back in 2 years.
What are some of the biggest financial challenges women entrepreneurs face today, and how can they overcome them?
That is a great question. There is still obviously an enormous funding gap. The vast majority of early stage funding in the world goes to male entrepreneurs. Now, there are some arguments that's because there are more male entrepreneurs. There are also arguments that women turn up to be entrepreneurs and are simply not given the funding. Now, that is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. And so what are the different ways that we can address that? Number one is actually understanding the individual that you're talking to. Just in every situation particularly for women, understanding the individual you're talking to and the way they're likely to respond is a really important component of getting what you need because at the end of the day, this is a negotiation about getting what you need. And so ensuring that you're talking to the right individual, B, you have the information that they need to hear, and C, they're willing to listen to you. And fortunately, over the course of the last 5 years, there have been an increasing number of people willing to listen. And so finding those people is the most important part of women getting access to more funding. And then also using a track record, women getting comfortable with using their own track record, because quite frankly, a lot of women's track record is completely remarkable, but also willing to leverage relationships. And those are the things that I think women are not comfortable with that we need to change very quickly.
Thank you. And actually, the last question from Slido that we have, I will give a couple more minutes in case the attendees want to add more or in case we have a question in the room here. But the last one from here is a more concrete question. Are there any studies with how much richer a person is after a lifetime only using risk-free savings accounts for their extra cash?
Good Lord. There are actually a lot of studies on that. And if you use a risk-free saving account, you are naturally not going to be as rich as somebody who over the course of 50 years put their money in the S&P 500. That is very clear because we're always looking at risk-adjusted returns. There are a number, I'm not going to quote a study that says this because there are a number of them, but it is very clear that the more risk tolerance you have, the more return you will get. That's a truism. So if you have a level of risk tolerance that only puts your money into interest-bearing accounts, that's fine, but you need to be clear that that's not going to have the same return as somebody who puts their money into the S&P 500 or as somebody who is willing to put their money into starting a new business that operates in 36 markets. Those are three very different risk propositions that will be undertaken by three very different types of individual. And you get the returns that are associated with each of those risk tolerances.
Any question from you guys? Wanted to ask? Please use the microphone. Thank you.
I think it's a really good point about talking to your other women friends about money, because I realize I don't do this at all.
None of us do, right?
Yeah, the last few times I've found out that one of my friends doesn't have an emergency savings, and that one of my friends who I thought was doing very well has no investments, and I was like, what's going on? And so I'm wondering, how do we start talking about this? How do you bring it up? Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great question. Goodness. So I'm trying to think back to the very few conversations I would have with girlfriends about money. And it always starts with asking questions or saying, hey, look, I found this really cool opportunity. What do you think about it? And it might be, I remember years ago, somebody had found a Russian ETF and they were super excited about this. They're like, Hermione, look at this. This is great. I'm not sure. Have you thought about the risks of this, this, and this? But, and then we actually started a really interesting conversation, which, by the way, didn't stick on finances, obviously moved into politics, moved back to finances, and then opens up a much broader discussion. So a lot of it is in the same way you talk about anything. Is that it evolves from something that somebody's found, something that somebody's seen, or maybe that there's, in a group, there's somebody who has actually done something really interesting, or bought a house, or, I don't know, how did you manage to do that? How did you think about it? Asking questions, and the same way any conversation starts. Because I think talking about money is no different than talking about school. I don't know, work. It all starts with asking questions or sharing facts, yeah.
What's super cool is just to sit down with someone who actually is an expert in the matter and just say I have this goal, I don't know how to reach them and so on. And she's just like, okay, then let's discuss a plan to get there. Then she also kind of looks at your spendings and so on and kind of really helps you set up some stuff to kind of save save a bit of money more every month and so on. And I don't know, through this, and I became a bit more financial aware.
Yeah.
And then started talking about it with my friends, and then kind of like snowballed.
That is so awesome. That is so awesome. Because I think the other thing, as you say that, is that a lot of people feel financial advisors are for millionaires. And actually, financial advisors, yeah, it is so worthwhile. That's very, very cool.
That's Svetan speaking here, by the way. How much proportion of my savings should be liquid cash and how much I should invest? My risk profile is risk averse. That's question one.
That's a good question, but it also very much depends on the magnitude of that. You should have enough cash to cover your requirements for the next 3 to 6 months, and to have a buffer in case you have a car accident and need to fix your car. So it is very much a function of the magnitude of your savings. As we all know, there's some very, very rich humans out there who have very limited cash, and they, but presumably they can also cover their cash requirements for the next 3 to 6 months. It's very dependent on what that looks like. It's all about your understanding your cash outgoing and those cash requirements.
Question 2, where could we get personalized consultancy or advice on financial matters?
You need to ask higher. So the vast majority of banks will have a financial advisor that you can talk to and ask. Increasingly, there are apps that can provide you with financial advice, whether it's basic budgeting or investing advice. There are a number within the Berlin ecosystem that can provide that advice. Specifically on budgeting, most neobanks have budgeting tools. On investing, things like Raisin and Trade Republic have huge amounts of advice. It's just a matter of going through it. And because they're licensed advisors, yes, they're also selling something, but that advice is really, really valuable, and it's a really good place to start. But as a typical, your normal, I'm going to say high street bank, but your Deutsche Bank or your Commerce Bank, most of them have financial advisors you can actually go and ask questions of. And, it's not restricted to people with certain balances. That information is out there. You just need to go and ask for it and have the confidence to do so regardless of how much money you have.
Just to follow up, because also in the presentation you said that you need to be very, very clear about your goals. So what do you think about using ChatGPT to clarify your goal and maybe draft the first steps of the execution plan?
I think that you need to be clear on your goal. It's hard to ask ChatGPT what's my goals, but to clarify it, absolutely you can, and to articulate it, yes, you can use that as a starting point, but you need to have the conversation with people to refine it and to really be clear on this is what I'm going to do next, and to build up your own confidence and knowledge. ChatGPT is a helpful tool in the refinement of it, and increasingly you see AI-based investment tooling, but I think the most important thing is that you understand where your money is and what your own requirements for that money are over time. So if it is that you want to buy a house, you can write that in ChatGPT and it will come back with, I want to buy a house. But you need to be clear on what that is, and you need to understand the underlying dynamics of that. And then you can take that, once it's refined and written out, you can take that to a financial advisor or put it into a different tool. But I think it's most important that you're clear in your head what you want from it, what your expenditures are, and the risk tolerance you're willing to take.
Thanks a million. It was very educational. I hope there are more sessions for women, but also I think everybody can benefit from financial literacy. We know it with small merchants. We definitely know it with women as well. So thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.